Coming up on Growing Indoors with the Eco Garden House, I'll show you how to overwinter an eggplant and bring it in successfully, as well as is the Eco Garden House really performing the way the box and the website says it should. All that and more coming up on Growing Indoors with the Eco Garden House. Sponsored by Eco Garden House. At last, an indoor greenhouse equipped with complete easy lighting and watering systems. You can grow perfect organic produce and plants at your home all year round. Grow 24/7, 365. You now have no excuses. Welcome to Growing Indoors with the Eco Garden House. I'm Joy Baird. Well, we have chosen to bring in at least one of our outdoor warm weather plants, and that is this eggplant here. Now you can do this with a number of plants, and what the goal is here is to bring it in, overwinter it in the Eco Garden House, allow it to continue to produce fruit for us, and then at the time that the weather is warm back up in the spring, we can just remove this from the Eco Garden House, take it, get it hardened off, climatized, and put it back out in the garden where we want it. So this is an eggplant, and you can do what we're going to do very similar to a pepper plant. So this was outside, so let's go to the garden and I'll show you what we did in order to bring this indoors. And you just don't want to bring it in as is. You want to do, there's some preparation, some things you want to do with that. So as fall approaches, you may have plants in containers or even in the ground that you would like to overwinter. At least this eggplant here, we might take a pepper plant as well and overwinter it in the Eco Garden House. It's just like it's a tropical climate or midsummer in the Eco Garden House. So this is what we're going to do here with overwintering an eggplant. We've got it in a plastic root maker container. Air prunes the roots. You can see some of them coming out here. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove it out of this container. And the reason why we just don't take this container, bring it inside, set it by a window, or put it in the Eco Garden House is because this soil has been outside all summer long, and there is all kinds of insects, good and bad, in this soil. And if we just bring it in, they're going to go in the Eco Garden House, they're going to go in the house. So we want to get rid of this soil first. So we want to, oh my, okay. So we want to try to knock off as much of this soil from the roots as possible. This may take some time, so you want to do it right. You want to take your time, loosen the soil up, and get it knocked off of the root ball. Okay, so I got most of the dirt off. Now, you could take this and dunk this in a bucket of water and be really precise about it, but I want to just get the majority of the large clumps of dirt off and try to get up in there and try to get some of this other dirt that's in some of the roots. So right there, that's fine by me because we've got most of the roots off, got a good root structure on this eggplant. So what I'm going to do here, set that down, just going to take this soil, which is good, and toss it in the garden. Now, you can take, and we're going to reuse this container, or you can take another container and fill it up with potting soil and go that route. What we're going to do is we're going to use some professional potting soil from Seed Growing Supply. I'm going to put a little at the bottom, have a base. There's my scooper there. Okay. And you can see this has got slow release fertilizer. It's got some perlite, vermiculite in it, some certified leaf compost, some peat moss. So it's going to give the plant, the eggplant, what it needs. So I'm just going to do a little bit at the bottom. Then I'm going to take my eggplant and I am going to bury the stem slightly, not much. Try to get it back in the same position as it was. And again, this is good, clean soil, potting mix that's going to really reduce the amount of potential insects that are going to be introduced inside. All right. Now with planting this, just like you would a plant at the nursery that you buy or start, I want to kind of fluff the roots out so they're not all in like one clump. So I'm going to spread them out a little bit here. And then pour more soil on it. All right. Do want to pack it down, make sure we get all the air pockets out of it. And we'll top it off, and then we'll do a little trimming of some of the leaves and here to help the plant out. Now we want to look at the plant here itself. We do have a leaf here. It's got some damage, a little droopy, a little discolored. I'm just going to take and trim that off. It's not going to hurt the plant, just going to get rid of that. I've got another one here. Just trimming this back just slightly. Now we do have several clusters of flowers here that are going to open up. So we'll keep that in mind. And at the bottom here, I'm just going to trim off some of this yellow stuff here. And it looks pretty good. Trim some more off at the bottom. And we've repotted it. Now it's time to take it in the Eco Garden House. So we've brought the eggplant in. You saw us switch the soil out to make sure we didn't bring in any bugs or insects from outside into the Eco Garden House. And it's the same thing with bringing bugs in the house in general. It's a very warm climate. They're going to react as if it was summer and start reproducing very rapidly, and then you've got a very big problem on your hands. One other thing you can do that we did not do, we just simply eye inspected it, is you can tip this upside down prior to putting it in the new soil in the container and rinse it off, spray it off with a hose to blast any eggs or insects off the bottom of the leaves. Now, in the instance that you are digging this up out of the ground, the procedure would be the same. You would just add fresh soil or soilless mix or a compost to the container to bring it in. Now, when bringing plants in, for instance, the pepper plant or an eggplant, you could do it with some tomato plants. That would be, it would still work. In any instance, there will be some shock that will occur to these plants. And we experienced it on this particular eggplant. We had a number of flowers that dropped off. We had about 7-8 flowers drop off. And this was expected because we disturbed the roots very, as you saw, pretty violently, knocked a lot of the old soil off. So that put the plant in somewhat of a shock. It didn't drop any leaves, it just dropped the flowers. And also the eggplant requires about 2 inches of water a week in the growing conditions to produce fruit. So in combination of moving it, removing the old soil, we put it in a stress situation. And now we have one flower here, as well as one flower here. And then we have a number of flowers throughout the plant that is beginning to open up. Now, eggplants, along with pepper plants and tomato plants, are what is considered self-pollinating plants. And we'll take a look at a diagram to make it more explanatory and more simply understood, and the process of what that really means when growing indoors in the Eco Garden House. So here is the basic plant anatomy, and this is for a tomato flower. You've got the flower, and what is self-pollinating about the peppers and the tomatoes and the eggplant, there's other self-pollinating plants, is the basic structure here. You've got the staple, the male portion. They both have male and female reproduction organs in the same flower per se here. So you got the piston, you got the stamen, the female parts, the male parts, and inside of the flower, or the structure here, the anther is pollen. So what occurs is when an insect, wind, a bug, or you tap the plant or the flower, you may see a little puff of whiteness come out of it. And that's the disturbance of the pollen. Now what occurs, whether the flower is right side up or hanging upside down, it makes no difference, is there's a certain amount of pollen that attaches itself to the stamen, and then goes down to the ovaries, which when pollinated produces the fruit. It's the egg, it's the tomato or the eggplant or the pepper plant. So that's the initial process of what happens there. So when you shake it, wind blows, insect gets in there, and a bee or whatever and flutters, it disturbs the pollen, which then falls to the ovaries, which then fertilizes the fruit or vegetable that is being or going to grow. So that's basically what is occurring there, and that's why that's why when you're growing indoors in the eco garden house, you want to shake your plants every day or two as you see the flowers develop, to disrupt that pollen, to get to that ovary, to pollinate that fruit, which you're trying to get it to perform. And there's some other tricks that you can perform if the shaking doesn't seem to be working. So you can take a Q-tip, an electric toothbrush, a paintbrush, or whatever you have there, and you're just going to go in there and agitate, again, loosening that pollen. And allowing it to do its nature reproduction methods inside of the plant. And that's the same for the peppers and the tomatoes in this system here. So now that we've brought the eggplant brought it in and we're overwintering it, and hopefully if everything goes as we expect it to, it will begin producing eggplants so we can harvest it over the winter. And whether you're growing it using the eco garden house to grow over winter, or you're using it to grow year round because you do not have the availability to have ground to grow in, it'll work either way. So let's talk about, is the eco garden house really performing the way the website and reviews have indicated that it should perform? So let's go through a little bit of what we have growing in this. This is just a small sample. As more videos we make, and we're going to really pack this thing as full to capacity as it can to maximize and to see what it really can perform. So in a previous episode, you saw us plant leaf lettuce here. You saw us plant 8 different varieties of leaf lettuce. Well, only 3 varieties have come up, and that's not because fault of the eco garden house. That is because some of those seeds were very old seeds. Lettuce seeds are viable for 1 to 3 years if in controlled climate, and and the seeds are properly stored. And some of those seeds were 4, 5, 7 years old. And this was a perfect opportunity to see if those seeds would germinate, because lettuce particular seeds need about 80 degrees Fahrenheit to germinate at its best capabilities. So we gave it the best chance. The seeds were no longer viable, so that's the reason why we only had 3 of the 8 come up. Now, we also intensive planting, not only in the eco garden house, but in everything we do to maximize the space, because we all don't have acreages to plant in. Intensive planting means that this leaf lettuce recommended to plant about 1 seed every 3 or 4 inches. We planted, literally, as you see, hundreds of seeds in a 6-inch pot. And as long as you keep it watered, it will grow very, very well. And a lot of the top growth here is preventing moisture evaporation because there's no soil here. You got to really dig around to find soil. It's basically keeping the sunlight or the lights here from causing the moisture to dry out as quickly. It does dry out, but not as quickly as if you only had 4 plants in this container, and that would just be a really waste of time on your part, as well as space loss. You really want to pack these in, and we've got 3 different varieties. And you can see this one here is the gourmet blend, because it's got several different types of lettuces in it. Now, in these other 2 containers, I have planted romaine lettuce. Now, if you're familiar with romaine lettuce, it is a cylinder-shaped, tightly wound head of lettuce. Recommendation is 1 per every 12 inches. Well, we don't have that space, so we're intensifying the planting by planting 3 in a 6-inch pot. And since I'm able to control the environment, control the water, all that, and then the goal is to have it all grow in one uniform cylinder, 3 plants that we can harvest in about 83 days. And this lettuce works very well here next to this side light, as the plants need that light to create chlorophyll and photosynthesis and do all its thing. Very, very lush, very, very green. And some of these are red because that is simply the variety of lettuces. Lettuces are not always green. There's some yellows, there's some reds, some greens. So just lettuce is not always a green plant. Now on the side here, this was an experiment that I decided to try. The center one was the first one. These are hanging baskets that you can purchase from your local garden center and or online provider, or if you are in a neighborhood in the city, you can find these typically at the end of the garden season or about 2 weeks after Mother's Day, because people buy these, forget to water them, and they'll throw the whole unit out. So we'll bring it home, scrub it out with hot soapy water, and we can plant in these. So I'm hanging them on the side here, and these are just regular bush beans, and I've never seen bush beans grow to this type of growth as if they were trying to mimic a pole bean growth. So it's very, very good. I'm not disappointed in that. That one grew very well. So then we added these two here. Now when the light is lowered, this does receive enough light from the side lights as well as the top light. Beans are partial shade plants, which means 4 to 6 hours of light, they will still grow and produce. They won't produce as heavy as if they were in full light, possibly underneath the central portion here or outside in absolute sunlight, but they will perform and produce fairly well. So that was something that worked out really well, and we're going to do that in another area, and we'll show that in a moment. Basil, very green, looking very well. Purple pod beans putting flowers on, yellow pod beans putting flowers on, and again, the purple pod beans are putting elevation on the growth as if they were trying to mimic pole beans. Never seen that before. Very pleased with that. Now, in a couple of episodes ago, you did see us intercrop radishes, and that is one thing here that is in the center of the pole beans. Now, or in the center of the bush beans. Now, intercropping is a method of planting a slower, a faster growing crop amongst slower growing crops. What I did not take in consideration was the effectiveness of the Eco Garden House. And I mean by that is outdoors in traditional ground garden, you have, let's say you plant beans when the soil is 60 degrees. Well, then you can still get some, you've got space between the rows, or you can plant radishes. Radishes are a cooler liking plant or weather plant. So the radishes take 30 days to reach maturity. They will grow very quickly even when the soil is cold, and the beans may be a little sluggish to get going until the time of year gets to the point where the soil is really warm. Well, the Eco Garden House it stays about 80 degrees Fahrenheit because that's what I've got the thermostat set to. So the beans have rapidly outgrown the radishes, which is not a terrible loss because radish greens are also edible. But we will go ahead and leave the radishes in here to see if we do get any root development. If not, we can certainly use the greens here. Pepper plants, I've got 4 pepper plants. You can see there's a lot of flowers on that particular pepper plant, as well as this pepper plant starting to put on flowers, and we just talked about how those are pollinated. And our biggest display of success here is the 4 tomato plants that we have growing. The largest one here up front is a yellow plum, and you can see a cluster of tomatoes there. We have a cluster of tomatoes here. The plant back here, that is part of the front plant that has vined and will continue to vine up. And there's a cluster there of plum tomatoes, as well as another cluster of flowers. In the back here, this is the volunteer that I'm not familiar with the variety because it came up by itself in the garden. This is going to be some kind of beefsteak or large slicing tomato, and most based on the size of that tomato forming. As well as we have Romas here that are starting to develop, and black crim in the back here starting to develop. And we're packing a lot of things in here because we can control the environment and control the plants more than we can outside. Basil in the corner is doing very well. If your basil begins to flower, that can be a slight sign of stress. Just pinch the flowers off and be done with it. As well as we have the cucumber back there that we are hand pollinating. We're working on that, and it has put on several inches of growth since we planted it, as well as the basil that is in the grow bag in that corner as well. And the beets here, we'll talk about the beets in an upcoming episode of what to do and how to deal with the beets. And one other thing, as we talked about the hanging baskets with the beans, these are going to be 2 hanging baskets that will hang off our light metal structure that holds the light up, that will be filled with soil and curly kale. Now that will be up here. It won't have direct light from underneath here, but the side lights and the light reflecting off the shroud, the silver portion here, will cascade enough light to those plants to where they will produce. Kale is also a plant that can tolerate some shade, 4 to 6 hours instead of 8 hours or 12 hours like other plants are needing to have in order to grow successfully. So we'll do those in an upcoming episode as well. So growing indoors at the Eco Garden House, is it performing the way it is intended to? I think it's outperforming the way the website has indicated it should, as well as the reviews I've also read. And this is just some, as I indicated, some of what we're growing. We're really going to pack this thing in upcoming episodes to the maximum capacity to really work this system to get as much out of it as we possibly can. Thanks for joining me for Growing Indoors at the Eco Garden House. I'm Joey Baird.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.